President Trump's first big legislative win, and today he signs it into law. But is the big, beautiful bill a victory for the American economy? Plus, no progress at all. President Trump says his call with Russia's leader yielded nothing. Is there any path to peace left for Ukraine? And national pride is at a record low on this 4th of July. We're going to talk about what's driving the dip in America's patriotism. It's 6 a.m. here on the East Coast. Here is a live look at New York City. Good morning, New York. Good morning to everybody, and happy Independence Day. I'm Audie Cornish. I want to thank you for waking up with us. Here's where we're going to start. This legislative win for the wealthy, for some small businesses and big corporations, and a loss for Americans who rely on SNAP for food and Medicaid for their health care. The president celebrated his bill's passage last night with a July 4th kickoff rally in Iowa after spending the past week getting holdouts in his party to fall in line.
Deport the illegals and slash hundreds of billions of dollars of waste and fraud, and that's what we're doing. With this bill, every major promise I made to the people of Iowa in 2024 became a promise kept. You know, they had a report today on some crazy fake station, but it wasn't fake in this regard. They said, you know, this guy actually did more than he promised. I did.
House Republicans handed Trump his big legislative victory. No Democratic lawmakers joined, but only a handful of GOP lawmakers voted against it. Some felt the changes to Medicaid went too far for millions of Americans. Others believe the spending cuts didn't go far enough to reduce the deficit. Today, the president signs that bill into law, and it's expected to be a made-for-TV spectacle on this 4th of July.
I think I have more power now. I do. You know, I could say, oh, gee, I don't know. I think I probably do because we've had a great record of success.
Joining me now to discuss, Jackie Kucinich, CNN political analyst and Washington bureau chief for the Boston Globe, Michelle Price, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Betsy Klein, CNN senior White House reporter. All right, you guys, thank you so much for being with me on a holiday. I really appreciate it. One of the things I was thinking about is that this is definitely a win for Trump, as we can see the New York Post calling it, tired of winning yet. Also a win for Mike Johnson, who I think as House Speaker, may be the most successful Republican speaker in a decade.
I mean, let's think about how he got here, right? Just to start. I mean, after that drama with Kevin McCarthy, he filled a leadership vacuum. And I think a lot of us who were observers didn't really know who he was and didn't know how long he would last. However, he does have a heavy behind him in the president. And so it's hard to say, and you know, when you talk to members, they really like him, they like his approach. But he also has truly the power of the presidency behind him. I mean, that's who was making the calls last night. But you're right, he really has secured himself a real place in this Republican conference.
We also just heard Trump there saying, I am more powerful, which, you know, I think is really interesting. I want to play for you guys conservative holdout Chip Roy, because he was talking about what the president was doing to try and change minds, coming there and making the case to them directly. Here's how he explained it.
Well, first of all, yesterday we got a significant conversations with the executive branch about what they can do to deal with the ridiculous amendment that was thrown in at the last minute, the 11th hour in the Senate on the Green New Scam subsidies. We were also able to get some significant, I think, assurances on what they're doing on spending, things they can do, as we've been talking about, rescissions through the pocket rescission process that the executive branch is carrying out, plus other things that I can't quite get into at the moment that I think will have significant impact on spending.
I don't know, who was it in the reporting talking about what you can't get into? Like, there's going to be more revealed about this bill over time, right?
I mean, I think that what we're also hearing from some of these members is that the rescissions package was part of that the Congress will be taking up, will be something that they're kind of taking into calculation, as in they're not happy with the cost of this bill, but they see spending cuts coming down the line. But what's really interesting is, you know, the idea of Trump being more powerful. He is more powerful, but he also has a Congress that is much less willing to stand up to him. They have less political cover, so it's a very lonely vote to go up against this president, and seeing him use the powers of that office, even literally using the Oval Office, bringing in some of the moderate members, some of the conservative holdouts. We saw some of them leaving with merchandise, you know, signed Trump merchandise, talking about how cool it was to go to the Oval Office. If you're one of 435 members, you don't necessarily get to go sit down with the president all the time. And so we're seeing him use kind of the trappings of the office to sway some of these folks, and it seems like it has worked in some of these cases.
How are you seeing all this? I know you talked about the bill basically being too big to fail, just in terms of its sheer size. But what do you make of, his power, the deal-making, kind of the dynamics here?
Well, for exactly that reason, I think this just underscores the power that Trump has amassed within his own party. These lawmakers are reluctant to say no. As you mentioned, it's a lonely place to be. And those anti-Trump Republicans have effectively been eradicated from Congress. That is what we saw over the last few weeks, even when they took what was really a difficult vote. And the president was so emphatic that this be one big, beautiful bill, as he calls it. He wanted it to all be in one. There was some discussion about putting it into a couple of different bills, and ultimately he felt that he could get this all through, and we saw him deliver.
Yeah, especially coming off the momentum of the first 100 days, right? So this is a momentous day for the president. Group chat, stay with me. We've got lots more to talk about today. Coming up on CNN this morning, President Trump will call Ukraine's president after a disappointing talk about peace with Russia. Plus, is it the Caitlin Clark effect that's behind the rise in women's sports? And we're digging into the impacts the president's policy agenda could have on rural hospitals and their patients across the country.
These places aren't just amazing places of healthcare, they're also sometimes the biggest employer in a community. So when a hospital leaves, communities dry up. People are scared to death.
I'm CNN tech reporter Claire Duffy. This week on the podcast, Terms of Service. For doctors, diagnosing diseases early is a huge priority, but doctors can't know everything. In recent years, though, some doctors have added a new tool to their screening toolkit, and that's AI.
It's so overwhelming to be in the seat of a patient.
To help me understand how this works, I invited Dr. Pierre Elias to our studio.
It's super hard to try and navigate all of that information, and I think this can be a wonderful resource in helping people do that.
Listen to CNN's Terms of Service with me, Claire Duffy, wherever you get your podcasts, or watch it on Spotify.
So the last 2 weeks have been filled with domestic policy wins for President Trump. When it comes to foreign policy, though, there has been a setback. Basically, there was a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and it did not go as well as Trump had expected, failing to move the needle on a peace deal with Ukraine.
Speaking to President Zelensky tomorrow, early in the morning, and I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop.
Russia launched a wave of airstrikes on Kyiv, forcing thousands to take shelter, wounding nearly 24 people. All while the Pentagon confirms the U.S. is halting some missile and ammunition shipments to Ukraine. This is at a critical point in the war. Joining me now to discuss, CNN global affairs analyst Kim Dozier. Kim, before we get started, I want you to hear what the president had to say when he was asked about why the U.S. would be halting ammunitions to Ukraine in this moment.
Why did you pause weapons?
We haven't. We're giving weapons, but we've given so many weapons. But we are giving weapons, and we're working with them and trying to help them. But we haven't. Biden emptied out our whole country giving them weapons, and we have to make sure that we have enough for ourselves.
Can you help me fact check this?
So the Biden administration did give to Ukraine a number of old munition supplies, basically emptied out the storehouses of things that have been sitting around for decades. And the U.S. manufacturing community hasn't caught up with that yet. This means the U.S. is going to have to send orders to various defense companies and refill the stocks. And some of that was already being done. But the new staff in the Pentagon have decided that those stocks are too low and that they've got to be replenished before the U.S. gives more stocks to Ukraine. But they didn't warn Kyiv this was coming. And as we saw from the overnight blitz on Kyiv, probably the worst since Russia's invasion in 2022 of the whole country, they really need air defenses.
Yeah. You know, you're talking about this kind of increase in missile attacks on the Ukrainians, and President Putin, you know, appears to be determined to keep fighting, right? That's what we're looking at here. I want you to hear this Kremlin aide, Yuri Ushakov, talking about this.
Our president also said that Russia will seek to reach the goals it has set, that is, the elimination of the well-known root causes that led to the current state of affairs, to the current acute confrontation, and Russia will not back down from these goals.
Yeah, root causes. Those root causes include the existence of Ukraine in its current form. One of Putin's regular talking points is that the 2014 Maidan revolution that brought the current government structure in power, which also brought Zelensky to office, was instigated by the West and NATO. So he wants the government to change. He wants the borders to change.
He doesn't want them in NATO or anyone else.
He wants the language to change. Basically, root causes means erasing Ukraine as an individual entity, and also getting NATO to agree to stop adding any members. When it's not NATO that's trying to expand, it's various countries who feel threatened by Russia who are applying for membership because they want to be covered under Article 5. They don't want to go through what Ukraine or Georgia before them is going through.
We know that Trump has had this kind of military success against Iran and dealing with Netanyahu in the Middle East crisis there. Can you give me a sense of this first 6 months with Russia? What am I looking at in terms of how Trump deals with Russia and is dealing with this war?
I think we're watching Trump finally catch up to what everybody else who's been watching Russia and watching this war understood, that Putin has no intention of stopping unless he's under great duress, something that President Zelensky said publicly in the past 24 hours. And one can only hope, the Ukrainians can only hope, that Trump will start applying the kind of pressure he has against Iran, the kind of pressure he exerts occasionally over Netanyahu with the Gaza situation. We may be seeing the announcement of a 2-month Gaza ceasefire next week when Netanyahu visits the White House. But Trump hasn't yet chosen to turn up that pressure on Putin. Maybe he needed to understand how intractable Putin was.
But it feels like less pressure, not more, over time.
It has been. He's just kind of going, oh, can't do anything. Whereas with other nations, he talks about everything from increasing sanctions to increasing trade barriers to bombing them. So let's see if he's finally ready to turn a corner and understands that Putin is not stopping his war in Ukraine.
All right, Kimberly Dozier, thanks so much. Appreciate your time. Ahead on CNN this morning, a controversial Supreme Court ruling clearing the way for the Trump administration to deport a group of migrants to South Sudan. Plus, Caitlin Clark has transformed women's basketball, not without controversy. And as we go to break, here's a look at the sunrise over my hometown, Boston. Okay, I want to go off script now to talk about the WNBA because, you know, it's having a moment. We've got Caitlin Clark to thank for that. She's the Indiana Fever point guard who's not only changing the game, she's basically shifting the conversation around it. And so you've got these analysts talking about the Caitlin Clark effect. So according to the WNBA itself, ratings are up. So is the value of the biggest franchises. And we're talking 3 digits, 180%. Now, her rise, however, is not without controversy. She's at the center of conversations about race, privilege, bias, and how we talk about women's sports. And that's the focus of Christine Brennan's new book, On Her Game, Caitlin Clark and the Revolution in Women's Sports. We're joined here by the author herself. Thank you so much for being here.
Audie, it's great to see you. Thank you very much.
So the thing that people always talk about, of course, is the rivalry between her and Angel Reese. But what I notice about it is we're putting a lot of pressure on 2 rookies here and putting a lot of story on them. Can you talk about the sports press role in this? Because I feel like it's always been part of the you need a villain and you need a hero to make the story.
Well, without a doubt. Red Sox, Yankees, Michigan, Ohio State, Auburn, Alabama. We love, my goodness, Soviet Union, U.S. in the Olympics, right? So rivalries are easy to cover. rivalries, it's like, okay, we'll focus on that. And both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese have talked quite a bit, Audie. And Caitlin, certainly in the book, I quote Angel in the book. She did not want to talk to me for the book, which is absolutely her right. I wish she had, but she didn't want to. About, first of all, the respect for one another. They don't hate each other. And they go way back. They go back to AAU basketball with their respective teams, Angels in Maryland and Caitlin's in Iowa, and then played against each other at Maryland because Angel first started at Maryland, so they saw each other.
I was a terrible high school basketball player, so I could say with confidence, you talk a lot of S on the court. Okay, right. That's like part of the game.
Well, and Caitlin Clark is not a victim. She does not need any defending. Caitlin Clark can give it as good as she takes it. And she loves to rev up the crowd. She is feisty. She lives on that. I think her fans actually love that about her. And of course, Angel is the same. Interestingly, they don't play the same position. So we've made this, to your point, we've kind of made this Angel and Caitlin and Angel, when in fact, different positions. They don't, as Caitlin says, they don't guard each other, but it does make it a very easy, kind of like the lowest common denominator story. Sports media, let's go with that.
And it's also created this dynamic of sort of Caitlin and the league itself. And as she's described, the black women players who have played for a long time, who have not garnered the same kind of attention. But, I was really interested. It was a few months ago, but UConn coach Gino Auriemma was sort of asked about what she could expect in her first year and what all this pressure was. And I want to play that clip.
The delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. There were actually odds on she's third or fourth in betting odds on being MVP at the WNBA. These people are so disrespectful and so unknowledgeable and so stupid that it gives women's basketball a bad name.
Characteristically candid there.
Yes.
Now, obviously, she has played well, but can you talk about what he has to say there about the fandoms and kind of how that has impacted things?
Well, certainly.
He said it set her up for failure in some ways.
He did. Now, I have to say that is one of the worst sports predictions I've seen in a while. And I presented that to Gino because I know him well and like him a lot. Obviously, a great character, great leader, terrific 12 national championships at UConn, of course. He just had his 12th. And, he of course, kind of came back off that a little bit. I think it surprised a lot of people how good Caitlin Clark was so quickly coming out of Iowa, then into the pros. So he was not alone in thinking that she would have trouble within a few games.
It has been a far more physical game than she expected,
right?
And people have talked about whether or not the league is protecting her, given what an economic force she is for them.
And that's the conundrum, right? I mean, she wants to be played tough, and she wants to play tough. But she's also, when we know when she was injured the last time, missing 5 games, Audie, that more than half of the viewership of the WNBA disappeared. I covered Tiger the length of his career. Those kind of numbers, they didn't more than 50% gone? No. Michael Jordan? No. So she is so important. She is the economic rocket fuel for this league. And yet, of course, they need to guard her. And of course, we're talking about a 74% black league and a white superstar. I've covered the league the length, basically from the Atlanta Olympics in '96, which was where it was launched and started in '97. And there were so many great players. In fact, many of them young Caitlin Clark's heroes, like Maya Moore, Simone Augustus, others, who never got the attention they deserved. And so we can understand some of the jealousy, some of the anger, some of the issues that have popped up because the leadership of the WNBA did not help the players, not because they're damsels in distress. They are not. They're tough, strong college graduates. But this was such a unique situation. And I think the league should have done much more.
But is it that, we were talking during the break, there was Larry Bird. There's always like a white player that garners a lot of attention, both for their play, but for also the perception of unusualness since the integration of the game and the predominance of black players. So what is all that different about her experience?
Because the WNBA never, ever was getting the coverage it deserved from the male-dominated mainstream sports media until now. So whereas the NBA had Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain and great stars from the past, it had reached a peak. The WNBA was never given the chance to reach that peak. I tried. I was covering it. I was telling our sports editors we should do more with it, going from the 90s into this century, and it wasn't happening. Again, the sexism, the racism, whatever it was in the mainstream sports media that said, we don't want to cover this. I'd be on radio shows, Audie, I'd get laughed at by the sports commentators saying, oh, women's basketball, they're just rolling around the floor.
Yeah.
You know, it's just jump balls.
And you actually still hear a version of that, of sort of, there's Caitlin Clark and then everyone else is trash. That's sort of how it is talked about
well, that's
in
wrong.
some corners of the media. And I want to ask you about that. What kind of reflection or kind of reconsideration have you had about the sports press and their role in this? Because it's not just, there's like the world of podcasts and all of the barstool experts, so to speak, literal, I mean, people, you know, at home. Are they making it worse?
You know, on one hand, you can make the case that any coverage brings eyeballs, you know, and again, as much as Angel...
But I mean, crafting the story, because as political reporters, we're always accused of, how are you telling this story? How are you framing this story? Is there something like that to be done for the sports press?
I certainly wish all of these journalists and sports writers and commentators and broadcasters, Audie, had been around a lot longer. In other words, where were you when the great Maya Moore was playing? Winning 4 titles, coming out of UConn, having had an incredible career. Not totally ignored, obviously beloved in Minnesota and well known in the sports world. Caitlin Clark has transcended sports. Frankly, she's not just one of the most famous athletes in our country, she's one of the most famous Americans at this point. And that's not bad for the WNBA, obviously, because that spotlight now is giving attention. We see it in the numbers of the All-Star votes, where Asia Wilson had 90,000 some votes 2 years ago. Now she's well into the hundreds of thousands. So people are noticing other players. It should have happened a long time ago. So what I would say to my colleagues, most of them men who laughed at me as I'd run off to cover the Olympic gold medal game and of the women's, you know, at various Olympics, and they said they're not going to waste any time with that. We know the U.S. is going to win. I'll go cover something else. I wish they'd been there sooner, because these women deserved it sooner. My point has been, and in the book, is it's happening now, and obviously the league needs to understand that there will be issues and potentially tough feelings when you again have a majority black league, and out of the blue, out of Iowa, over the last several years of amazing play, comes this one great player.
And their fandom.
And the fandom. Although fans are fans. I mean, Roger Goodell is not worried about delusional fans. So I've argued with Gino on that.
He's never been pepper sprayed in one of their fan riots,
well,
maybe.
No, he hasn't. But you know what I'm saying. Sports want
it.
fans. And X is a cesspool. But it is terrible what has happened to these women on social media. And we know white women get it worse than men. And of course, black women have it worse than white women. So the WNBA, I go look at that leadership and say, how did they not anticipate this moment? You could see it coming. The barnstorming in Iowa, the record crowds, the record TV ratings, and then all of a sudden the players are kind of left adrift. And that's not my voice. Dr. Harry Edwards, the great civil rights advocate and leader, Black Power salute in Mexico City in '68, Brianna Scurry, their voices in the book, for me, mean so much as we start to work through these issues.
Well, Christian, I don't envy you having to unpack this moment in the spotlight, but the book is amazing. Thank you so much, Christine Brennan, and you can get a copy of On Her Game next Tuesday. Straight ahead on CNN this morning, how the newly passed Big Beautiful Bill could become a big healthcare problem for millions of rural Americans.
Live Aid brought together the world's biggest musicians for one important cause. Now, 40 years later, a new CNN original series explores how it came to be. Live Aid, when rock and roll took on the world. Sunday at 9 on CNN.
4th of July celebrations already in full swing. Fireworks lighting up the sky last night in Texas. Good morning, everybody. I'm Audie Cornish. Thank you for joining me on CNN this morning on this holiday. It is now 37 minutes past the hour, and here's what's happening right now. Last night in Iowa, President Trump kicked off a year of events leading up to next 4th of July. On this 4th of July, today, he'll honor the B-2 bombers who pulled off the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. There's going to be a flyover at the White House. Then later, he's going to watch the fireworks on the South Lawn. And the Supreme Court will now allow the administration to deport migrants held in Djibouti to South Sudan. A group of migrants, some from Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, they've been held at a military base in Djibouti for weeks. And later this afternoon, President Trump will sign his big, beautiful bill into law. House Republicans delivering the first major legislative win of the president's second term. Now, it extends tax cuts. It also slashes funding for some social safety net programs. Hospitals in rural communities around the country are bracing for the fallout of these changes to Medicaid. It slashes nearly $1 trillion from Medicaid, which eventually led to Republican Senators Susan Collins and Tom Tillis to vote against it.
What do I tell 663,000 people in 2 years or 3 years? When President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore, guys. The effect of this bill is to break a promise.
Here's the thing, it's not just North Carolina facing those cuts. According to analysis by the Kaiser Family Foundation, the new big bill and other policy changes are expected to leave roughly 17 million people, more people without insurance coverage by 2034, making this the biggest rollback of health insurance coverage ever due to federal changes. Other states with large rural populations, say Kentucky, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Missouri, well, they're going to see rural Medicaid spending plummet by more than $5 billion over the next decade. Joining me now to talk about this is Sarah Jane Tribble, Chief Rural Correspondent for Kaiser Family Foundation Health News. Sarah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I can imagine your phone is ringing off the hook with this particular beat. Can you talk about the particular concerns? When people call you to say, wait, are they really doing it? Did this part end up in the bill? What are they worried about?
Right. So I've been talking to hospital CEOs all week long, texting this morning with one actually on the West Coast, which they're up kind of early. Look, on last Saturday night, there was hospital CEOs texting their constituents, texting their associations. What they're worried about is the cuts in Medicaid, not only to the people who they serve, the patients, because those cuts will happen. The work requirements and the paperwork will cause people to fall off the ranks, right, and not have coverage. But also there are things like provider taxes and state-directed payments, these financing mechanisms in Medicaid that hospitals have largely depended on in many ways to help kind of bolster their bottom lines. It's just some financing mechanisms that add more Medicaid dollars to their budgets.
One of the things I want to ask you about is this interview with Kansas Senator Jerry Moran. He was on the Senate floor talking about these concerns, and here is what he said, or sort of explained after voting yes.
I am concerned about the issue of rural hospitals in particular, but healthcare generally in Kansas. So the end result on how we are helping hospitals is that we made certain that there was no changes for the next 2 years in the reimbursement to our hospitals, and so giving them a chance. But the plan under this bill is that Medicaid reimbursements are taking steps downward as far as a percentage.
And the Senate did add a $50 billion fund to help support rural hospitals. But can you be my senator translator? Right then, what was he saying? Was he saying, look, don't worry because the math is going to work out? What are we hearing?
Well, you're in luck. I'm from Kansas. I grew up in Kansas.
Double
I was
whammy.
talking to a Kansas CEO just the other night, and they are concerned about these Medicaid cuts. It softens the blow because Moran actually had a virtual press conference with 100 hospital CEOs in Kansas. I think yesterday is what the press release said from the Kansas Hospital Association, trying to talk to them, answering their questions. And that provider tax I just mentioned, those state-directed payments, those funding mechanisms for Medicaid that go directly to the hospitals, those are the things that got time delays. And so what I'm seeing from places like Kansas and Michigan and other places and hearing from CEOs is mitigation. We have time to mitigate this bill. We have time to maybe, and I think this is sort of a new tactic that I'm hearing about in the last 24 hours. They know it's bad. They know it's coming. Maybe they can fix it before it takes effect.
They think that time is some lobbying time. Before I let you go, for the average person, it's not that they don't feel bad for a healthcare CEO, but there's a sense that they can figure this out. They're going to get their money somehow.
Okay.
You don't think so? Tell me more.
Well, look, there's about 1,300 critical access hospitals across the U.S., and these are small rural hospitals, 25 beds or less. These are people who wake up every day checking their budget to make sure they have enough to make payroll for their employees. And I've stood at hospital doors where they've shut the doors and said, we can't pay you tomorrow. I've talked to employees who have gone without payment for their work at hospitals because they just ran out of money at these rural hospitals. So it's not like you're looking at a big city hospital that has lots of cash on hand in the bank. These are hospitals that are struggling every day. And the reason they do it is because the people in their community show up at their emergency department with chronically ill problems that haven't been taken care of because they don't have money to pay for their health care. So they're taking care of a population that's very vulnerable, is the word that experts use, but they're just sick and they're tired. And, you know, rural communities, 1 out of every 4 people in rural communities is on Medicaid. Nearly 50% of babies born are on Medicaid. So when you start talking about cutting Medicaid, it cuts close to home for these rural communities. And the hospitals and the clinics that support them, they're going to lose revenues. They're going to lose dollars because they won't have people who have coverage to then pay for their care. And that becomes charity care for those facilities.
Which opens up a whole other thing, right, for the system. Sarah Jane, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have you back. I really appreciate your time. She's a rural correspondent for Kaiser Family Foundation Health News. Now, still ahead on CNN this morning, Americans are gearing up to celebrate the 4th of July. We're going to talk about why this day is actually one of the deadliest holidays in many cities when we lawyer up with Elliott Williams next. And are you proud to be an American? What new polling shows about record low levels of adults backing that statement? It's America's birthday. In addition to the fireworks lighting up the sky, the holiday has a long history of violence. It's actually one of the deadliest days of the year for most cities. Gun violence already claimed the lives of 4 people in Chicago and wounded at least 14 others. This happened in a drive-by shooting going into the holiday weekend.
We are mobilizing now to make sure that this incident does not return and bring about more violence. I need people to come together as a city to show up for one another in order for us to continue to drive violence down the city of Chicago and to prevent incidences like this from occurring.
And it's not just crime. It's also when a lot of people get injured. Just last night, 8 people were hurt after fireworks exploded on Cape Cod. It happened while they were setting up for the annual fireworks show. So for more on these kind of public safety concerns on the 4th, I'm bringing in my friend, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst, Elliott Williams. Elliott, good morning.
Good morning.
So we're hoping at the end of this, people will not have to lawyer up. That is the goal. But before we get there, the FBI and DHS actually issued a joint bulletin warning about the risk for potential lone wolf attacks, talking about how these individuals might be motivated by a broad range of things. I'm sure I'm not the only even parent that has been reluctant to kind of bring my family to a big event out of just these kind of general concerns.
These are valid general concerns. This is a day of joy. It's a day of celebration, but it's also historically the most violent day of the year. Most mass shootings, I believe, over the course of the year tend to happen on July 4th. And it's symbolic. People know, terrorists or people who wish to harm Americans or cause a symbol know that they can cause a big splash and hurt America on a special day. And so people should always exercise caution in big crowds. However, today particularly is a day to be on alert. But law enforcement typically is on it because they know.
All right. The other thing we mentioned earlier, fireworks. You know, there's a lot of drinking. Can you talk about sort of the flip side of celebration, so to speak?
You know, it's like one of the founding principles of the country is the pursuit of happiness. The ability to celebrate is a wonderful thing we do as Americans. You can't drink alcohol everywhere in America, everywhere in the world, I mean. Yeah. However, there come huge legal costs. So let's start with alcohol. July 4th and July 5th are some of the biggest days of the year for DUI enforcement events where the crashes, the injuries, but also the arrests and the crimes. And one can go to jail for a very long time for getting behind the wheel of a car under the influence of alcohol. Another big one are boating DUI-related events. People go out on their boats intoxicated.
I know, but I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, can you get pulled over in your boat?
It really is. It really is. And part of it's not just an increase in the amount of consumption. The checkpoints, even on boats and even on the roads, increase on a day like today. Yeah. So the boats, the DUIs are the big one. And then, of course, fireworks present an entire world of legal enforcement around July 4th. These 2 days are the highest single emergency room days of the year. 45,000 people go to the emergency rooms on July 4th and July 5th, often for burns and often for explosions. People really get hurt because they're playing around with the fireworks.
Okay, Elliot, you rolled up here in a seersucker suit and then only told me sad news.
Okay.
So what takeaway do you want us to have from all of these safety concerns on our day of celebration?
Well, one of the greatest things, number one, I actually started the day in a red tie today too, but it felt like a bridge too far.
Too much.
You know what? I looked like one of the guys from the barbershop quartet in Charlotte's Web. It was a bridge too far. I couldn't do it.
Don't ignore the question.
I couldn't do it. Of all the things to celebrate today, the greatest legal story of the day is declaring emancipation from the greatest empire in world history. And that act of defiance was itself a pretty profound legal story. It's big news. And even in a profoundly divided country, as we are today, I read the same newspaper as you do and looking at all of these here.
Yeah.
It's big news to celebrate who we are as a country and the freedoms we have, even when we're not at our best as a nation. So I think, you can talk about the burns, all the DUI visits, the arson that you can get when you set somebody's car on fire, which happens on the internet.
Yeah.
However, this is a day to celebrate. It's a day to be happy, and we should be proud of being Americans.
All right, Elliot, thank you for being here on a holiday.
No problem.
I think. Elliot Williams is CNN legal analyst. It's now 53 minutes past the hour. Here's your morning roundup. Well-known boxer now facing deportation from the U.S. ICE agents detained Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. yesterday, just days after his major boxing match with influencer Jake Paul. Chavez has a warrant out for his arrest in Mexico for alleged involvement in organized crime. And the man accused of killing a Minnesota state lawmaker and her husband, he appeared in court Thursday. He waived his right to full hearings on whether he should be released on bail and on probable cause. He says he made that move to, quote, get us to court faster where the truth can come out. And today, President Trump will be notifying trade partners of their new tariff rates, ranging from 10% to 70%. The president didn't reveal which countries he's talking about, but said it will begin on August 1st. The 90-day pause on his trade war is expected to be lifted next Wednesday. And you can't celebrate the 4th of July without hot dogs. And today, Joey Chestnut is back, taking part in Nathan's hot dog eating contest. He holds the world record for downing 76 hot dogs and buns in just 10 minutes. Chestnut wasn't part of the contest last year because of a contract dispute involving a plant-based meat company. Joining CNN for a holiday, join us for a holiday event with coast-to-coast fireworks and musical performances. Lainey Wilson, Dierks Bentley, Nelly, and more celebrate the 4th in America with Dana Bash and Boris Sanchez live tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. And as America gets ready to celebrate the 4th of July, President Trump is already looking ahead to America's 250th birthday. He previewed a full year's worth of celebrations in Iowa last night, leading up to next July, including a rather unconventional event at the White House.
We're going to have a UFC fight. We're going to have a UFC fight. Think of this, on the grounds of the White House. We have a lot of land there. We're going to build a little... We're not. Dana's going to do it. Dana's great, one of a kind. Going to have a UFC fight, championship fight, full fight, like 20, 25,000 people. And we're going to do that as part of 250 also.
But many may not be feeling it this year. According to the latest Gallup poll, just 58% of U.S. adults say they are extremely or very proud to be an American. That's down 9 points from a year ago and a record low since Gallup started asking that question 25 years ago. The group chat is back. I don't know how to process this. Who here thinks that it might be generational? Something that we're looking. You?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
I think if you look at the timing of this, Gen Z, they were born between 1997 and 2012. They largely came of age in this post 9/11 era that saw the U.S. in war in the Middle East, a recession, a pandemic, the rise of social media. These are all things that have made us feel more disillusioned and less, more divided. And so I don't think it's particularly shocking that they don't feel pride in their country. And separately, I think on the party situation here, there's a clear divide between Republicans and Democrats on the issue of patriotism. And Democrats just haven't been able to take ownership of patriotism the way that Republicans have. They have a branding problem. So if they believe it's a core value,
But like,
to
take
be
a look at this
patriotic-
chart. I always look at the independent line, and I think that's notable too, right? Clearing over 53%. And I'm wondering how you guys think about whether people are not proud of their country or not proud of the partisanship of their country.
But I think patriotism, do we even agree what that is?
Say more.
Is it voting? Is it protesting? Is it flying a flag? Is it fealty to the Constitution? I think that's also a question of what the definition of that is.
Yeah, and whether criticism is also a part of that, right?
Well, what's interesting on the politics of this is we've long seen Republicans kind of use patriotism as a key part of their messaging, including like when you go to Republican political events, people are wearing the American flag routinely. We haven't seen that a lot with Democrats. We did a little bit last year in the presidential campaign.
Yeah, during the conventions is usually when they lean hard.
During that, and also when President Biden and then Vice President Harris were making the case that democracy was on the line. When Liz Cheney, a Republican congresswoman, joined the campaign, they were handing out small American flags, which I have not seen them do at Democratic events in a while. But with Democrats, you've seen those numbers of who feels patriotic, they have dropped. Starting around when Donald Trump came into the political scene in 2016, there's a kind of a clear delineation there.
I used to also think that the immigrant story was part of that. I remember as a cub reporter, you often were sent on July 4th to a naturalization ceremony, and now you've got DOJ saying they're going to work on denaturalization cases. Betsy, how do you think this is how the administration is changing how we think of it?
Absolutely. I mean, you see this with how President Trump has really harnessed the brand of patriotism. You see him hugging the American flag. The issue for Democrats right now is that if it's a core value and Americans think it's a good thing to be patriotic, but they don't think that aligns with the Democratic Party, the party has a big problem.
But last night, the event in Iowa was supposed to be about America's 250th birthday celebration. That was what it was originally supposed to be about. A lot of it became about President Donald Trump's legislative accomplishments. But in his remarks, he called Democrats, he said that they hate America, he said he hates them. Those are not exactly the kinds of comments that are going to bring about a great commonality between people across the aisle.
Or unifying. Jackie, last moment to you.
One of my favorite stories that we did, James Pindle wrote it at the end of the campaign, was he actually went to a naturalization ceremony. And everyone there, really excited to,
by definition, wants to be American.
Wants to be American. So, I think this is one of those things. It depends on who you're talking to. But these were people who are apolitical and were still really excited.
Yeah.
So,
well, you guys, thanks for talking about that with me. I think it's going to be a source of conversation going future, especially as we talk about immigration. What does it mean to be an American who can earn that, whether it can be earned? I want to thank you all for waking up with us and being with us on a holiday.